Paul Gurney has just released his second solo album, Blue Horizon. Paul is also a member of Auckland band the DeStotos. Here he is to tell us how he and producer Bob Shepard set out to make Blue Horizon.
Well, Bob and I have worked together. This is the fourth album we've worked on. I actually met Bob through Steve Garden. Steve produced our first DeStotos album,
Right.
and took the whole process from production through the mix, mastering, the whole thing. When we came to do the second DeStotos album, Steve was up to his eyeballs and stuff and introduced us to Bob. And I guess the rest, as they say, is history. So for the last four albums that I've worked on, Bob has sat in the production chair and Steve has come in at the back end and done the mixing and mastering.
Right.
Which I kind of think is a really good process, because Steve comes to these tracks with completely fresh airs. You know, Bob and I mean, we spent about, 14, 15 months in the studio recording the album. Bob does the rough mixing, and then Steve gets the stuff completely fresh and can go from there.
Cool.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like I get the best of both worlds. But Bob is fabulous. I mean, I think every time you come to make a new album, you kind of go through that whole process of, shall I change up the production team or go somewhere else? And I certainly did that for this album. I kind of thought long and deep about what I wanted out of the production, I guess. But in the end, I think it was a sort of an easy decision to stay with that team, because for the kind of genre I'm in,
Yep.
apart from perhaps Wayne Bell, who I admire hugely as a producer, there's probably nobody else in Auckland that I would reach out to. So yeah.
Gotcha. So why a solo album and not a DeSoto's album?
Yeah, good question. And it's the second one in a row that I've sort of done as a solo album.
Right.
I think a lot of the writing was done, I guess, prior to and during the COVID process. So it was a sort of a period of isolation. A lot of the songs are very acoustically driven. I wanted to kind of bring the sort of Daniel Lanois-esque pedal steel to a lot of it.
Right.
So it's not necessarily core DeSotos territory. I mean, I think some of the songs on the album are and some aren't. But having said that, the DeSotos rhythm section did all the recording. So we started with a couple of days at Roundhead doing all the bass and drum tracks with the DeSotos rhythm section. Ronnie, our keyboard player, is on about 3 or 4 of the tracks. But Bob does a lot of the other sort of keyboards and atmospherics. I think the thing these days, because you don't make any money, let's be honest, out of recording an album.
Right.
So it's changed up, I think, the way that albums are produced a little bit now. And in some respects, I find that it's an easier process to just have total creative and artistic control over it.
Right.
And do your own thing. Having said that, we've got the live launch gig coming out. The DeSotos are playing at the show. So, and we are talking about actually doing some new recording as a band next year. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So back to this album. So from what I read, a lot of the songs are driven by some kind of existential struggles that have happened with you, with everybody probably over the COVID thing and lockdown and all that. Is that the driving force behind a lot of the songs?
Yeah, look, it's part of it, Marty. I mean, I don't necessarily want it to be seen just as another lockdown album, although there is one track on there that speaks specifically to that, the track Ricochet. But I think it's more sort of reflecting on, I suppose, a sense of dislocation that exists probably globally. I mean, locally, globally. That can be a physical dislocation. It can be a mental dislocation. And I think COVID obviously has been part of that. But I think when you look at what was going on before that in terms of the ongoing issues with climate change, and then you layer in a war in Europe. You've got 3 events, and I've often sort of bored my son with this theory that, this is the biggest thing by far to hit the planet since the Second World War. And we've sort of had 3 massive events all kind of happening concurrently. And I do a little bit of teaching, music teaching in the mental health area. And everyone I'm talking to in that sector is saying, there's a tidal wave of issues coming and hitting now, and a lot of that is just driven by people's internals not really sort of coping with this whole dislocation that's going on in the world.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess that did drive a number of the songs. Whether you take the lyric at a personal level or a global level is up to the listener.
Right.
But yeah, having said that, I wasn't trying to. I mean, I kind of feel like it's a dark album, but I think it also is a beautiful album sonically.
Yeah. Yes.
Get too jagged with it from a sonic side, but yeah, lyrically, yeah.
Yep. And the album opens with Someplace Else, and there's a video attached with that. So why have you led things off with that?
Back from the journeys and discovery, to find there's nothing there, just someplace else. So I'm packing my bags, I'm gonna try to move on.
Once the album was completed, we had long discussions between Bob, Steve, and I about the running order of the album, as you do.
Right.
And I think artistically, those guys felt that was just a killer as an opening track.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with it. It's probably one that doesn't necessarily live so much in the absolute Americana world. I think the tracks that follow it kind of do.
Right.
Someplace else to me sort of almost feels sort of Celtic, or it's almost got an English folkiness to it in a strange way. Bob described it as a bit of early Genesis or something. So I don't know. I mean, everyone sort of, but it just felt like I use a very unusual guitar tuning in that track, which brings a certain slightly ethereal sort of feel to the whole thing, which I was excited by that track as a piece of creative work. So I think in the album ordering, we probably front stacked the slightly more abstract, ethereal tracks.
Right.
And then some of the later stuff on the album is probably a little more derivative and getting into some of my influences. So, yeah.
Right. Which one of those would be Belong, which is very kind of Roy Orbison-y, if that can be.
Yeah. Yeah, that is
record.
Complete and utter. I mean, I would describe that. And we deliberately in the studio went after. We just completely, I mean, it's an homage to Roy.
Wasn't looking round at all. No pride before the fall. Dancing visions will appear, revealing new frontiers. You should be mine. Tell myself that all the time. It's plain to see you belong right here with me.
Roy was one of my huge early loves, and vocally probably still is. So sort of completely unashamed about that one. But yeah, I guess that one would be the most obvious. But then also Perfect Space, I think that track I was trying to kind of steal a little bit of the Bonnie Raitt Little Feat type groove on that track.
Right.
Just that feel. So yeah, I mean, I have no issue with paying my respects to some of the artists that I've loved all the way through.
Right. Well, one of the ones I heard was early Fleetwood Mac, like Albatross era on Misunderstood.
It's an old refrain. Couples fuss and fight. Things get rough, things get loud. In the deep of the night. Yes, they do.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I take that as a compliment.
Well, that's good.
Sort of Misunderstood for me sort of almost sits in sort of the Texan country blues almost a little bit of R&B in there.
Right.
But then we took it back to the country world by putting the pedal steel on it.
Right.
It's personally, it's probably one of my favorite tracks on there. I know when Wayne had to listen to the album, that and Fragile were his absolute favorites. So it's had some nice, yeah, it's a track I really like. Yeah.
Right. Right. And watching the video, you're left-handed, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Good on you. How I am too. That's why I noticed. And so how does that affect your music making and especially your guitar playing?
Well, I think like from a very young age, when I first picked up the guitar, when I think I was about 12, I always naturally held it left-handed. And I don't know if it was a conscious decision at the time, but in fact, I think it was through school, to be honest, but I got a guitar restrung into a standard string arrangement, if you like, for
Yep.
left hand. So over the years, when I was quite young, it was always a bit of a pain in the ass because trying to find left-handed instruments back then was quite difficult.
Sure.
When I went to live in the UK was the first time I actually bought a truly left-handed guitar, which was a beautiful Fender Strat down in Denmark Street. And it was a bit of a revelation because all of a sudden the controls being in the right place and
Yeah.
everything that I'd struggled with for the first, 10 years of playing was like, okay. And most of the guitars, I have got a few, to be fair, but I tend to import them from overseas. Right. I did just buy quite recently here a left-hand Epiphone Casino, which was a famous Beatles instrument. So that was quite rare to find in New Zealand. I actually found that at the rock shop in Lower Hutt. So
nice. Very good. Good old rock shop. Now, back to the album. It ends with a tune called Windows, and it sounds like there's some kind of choir or something, a bunch of voices joining in at that one. Tell me a little bit about that one. Windows on high. Windows on high.
I've been a member of Jubilation Choir in Auckland for, about 8 years now, 7 or 8 years.
Right.
And that's been a great learning curve for me, I think, as a singer, because you sing a cappella and unless you're doing the leads out the front, which I do a couple of, but you're basically singing without microphones. So no guitar, no nothing, everything's straight. And I've kind of loved being part of the choir over the years. And when we talked about it, it was actually Bob's suggestion to finish that track with a little choral outro. And so I grabbed a couple of the members of Jubilation, did a bit of multi-tracking to just give it a little gospel feel. I think that track was always going to be the album closer, and it just seemed there's a slightly kind of spiritual feel to the lyric.
Right. Yep.
Actually written, the original lyrical idea came from just after my mother had passed away, which was the Windows on High feeling. And Richard Adams took that lyric and did some work with it. And the whole song's written around Major 7th, so it has a kind of, again, a real 70s vibe to it, I think. So,
right.
Yeah.
Cool. So you touched on the fact you have a launch gig coming up. I think it's November 17th at Thirsty Dog, right?
Yep.
And the whole band is going to be. What else can you tell me about what folks can expect at that show?
Yeah, so that gig will have the members of the DeStotos playing, but also Neil Watson, who was the pedal steel player on the album.
Yep.
Pedal and lap steel, and Richard Adams on violin.
Yep.
And then we've also got Marnie Harris, accompanied by Wayne Bell, opening the show. So it's a kind of a one-off night, and I'm pretty excited about that. And then we head away the following week on a DeStotos tour around the North Island. So, yeah, look, I'm thinking it's going to I'm doing about 7 of the tracks off the new album, which is quite a big undertaking to actually learn, because a lot of those songs won't be part of our regular set list. So, and obviously you want to present those as well in the live environment as you do on the record. So,
Yep. That should be good. Looking forward to hearing it live. So it's a beautiful sounding record. So
thank you.
Yeah. All righty. Well, good luck with the launch and the tour, and we'll see what you come up with next.
Thank you, Marty. And yeah, hope to see you there on the night.
Righto. Bye-bye.
Cheers.